Welcome to this program sponsored by the ACLU on tasers, militarization, and the police in Coventry. My name is Sondra Astor Stave. I'm a member of the Northeastern Connecticut League of Women Voters and frequently serve as a moderator for events in this part of the state. Our format for this evening is going to be short introductions by our two panelists, David McGuire from the ACLU and Mark Palmer, the Chief of Police here in Coventry. Then I have some questions that were submitted for me by the ACLU that I will ask our panelists. And at the time that we exhaust those questions, or it seems appropriate, we will invite the members of the audience to ask questions. Okay? So we'll start off with David McGuire.
Well, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. This is an important topic that's come to light and attention after the incidents in Ferguson not that long ago. The ACLU of Connecticut has been aware and concerned about the increasing militarization of police in Connecticut and across the country before the Ferguson incident. We filed Freedom of Information Act requests with departments across the state, and it's absolutely clear that there is an increasing militarization and paramilitary mentality among police in Connecticut. There are many departments that have not gone to that, but it's something that the public needs to be aware of and engaged on. The thing that goes hand in hand with that is the use of SWAT teams, regional SWAT teams or department SWAT teams, who often are armed with this military surplus that's acquired from the Department of Defense. So what we're essentially advocating for is a dialogue between law enforcement and law enforcement and community members, and also some kind of oversight and public hearing process before departments acquire this kind of military technology. There's an increasing movement in Connecticut and across the country to have community policing, and it's important that there's trust and a dialogue between both sides for that to happen. Very briefly, I'll talk about the 1033 program, which is a program that again came to light after the Ferguson incident. And essentially, that's a program where local departments can receive military surplus, much of which is brand new from the federal government. And again, there's not a requirement that there's any public disclosure about this. So we're hoping that this gets out there. I appreciate the chief engaging on this. We've had 5 of these discussions around the state, and they've produced a really good dialogue. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody here. For those that live in Coventry, welcome. I've probably seen you before, maybe spoken to you before. For those who do not live here, welcome to our great town. It's a pleasure to be here with Dave. Actually, when David contacted me, his office contacted me, I really jumped at the opportunity to participate in this forum. Although very often the police community in Connecticut, whether it be the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association, individual police chiefs or departments, don't always agree with the position that the ACLU takes. I think these discussions are very important to have, particularly in an open forum like this with members of the public present who can hear what's being said by both the ACLU representative and police chiefs throughout the state. We welcome the discussion, and I can talk for my own department, and many of the chiefs that I know run very open and transparent departments. We realize that we only get our authority from the people, if you will, from the laws that are made through the legislature and supported by the voters of either the town or the state or the federal government. So we appreciate that and we understand that, and hopefully as we go through this evening, I can talk about some of the things we do to ensure that we have positive engagements with the residents, that we're open and transparent when it comes to getting military equipment, because we do participate with the program that David mentioned, the 1033 program. We have received equipment through that program, but we do it in a manner that we engage our town manager, who's my boss, and the town council, who oversees the operations of the town and are responsible ultimately to the citizens that vote them in. Actually, I want to correct something that David mentioned, that the 1033 program believe you said it came after Ferguson. Maybe it got a lot of attention after.
No, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's from the 80s.
The 1033 program's been in place for decades. The police departments have been able to take advantage of equipment that was at one time used by the military, and it's either being abandoned, it's no longer useful, and so forth. And that equipment ranges anything from cold weather gear to goggles to military vehicles that we probably all have seen. The most popular one that's become available, a lot of police departments have taken advantage of, it's called MRAP, Mine Resistant Artillery Personnel Vehicle, or some acronym similar to that. Just to let you know, we don't have one here in the town of Coventry, and we don't need one here in the town of Coventry. But I can talk later as we go on during the discussion and talk about the types of equipment that we get, what we use it for. And David's right, the ACLU did make a request to all police departments in the state, and we were, I think, one of the first to respond about the equipment that we got. We have nothing to hide from the public, because again, that's where we get our authority from. And just a little bit about myself. I think most of you that live in town know me anyway. I've been in policing, believe it or not, for 36 years. Sometimes I really have to think it's 36 years, but it is. I spent 28 years as a police officer in the city of Norwalk. I rose to the rank of deputy chief there. Norwalk, as you probably know, is a larger urban type community. We had close to 200 police officers there. I left there and I had a number of job opportunities, and I really chose to come to the town of Coventry. I love the town. It's a great town. The people are great. We have good engagement with the citizens. So that being said, I think I have a good perspective of policing from both maybe a larger, more urban department, and also kind of a suburban, more rural department. The work is kind of the same. The way we do it may be a little different, but we still engage with the public. We still need the public to support us or support their police department, and we'd like to talk about that this evening.
Mark, you mentioned one of the pieces of equipment that you don't have, but one of the pieces of equipment that, according to what I have here, that is here in Coventry, is a Humvee.
We do. Yes.
Right. And what do you do with that?
Well, I'll tell you how that came about. I think it was February of 2012. There was a significant snowstorm with, I think, 23 inches of snow. We had so much snow here in Coventry that we got to the point where our police vehicles could not go through the snow. And calls for service come in, medical calls, disturbances, and those types of things come in regardless of the weather. We got to the point where, because we couldn't travel through the snow, because our police cars just couldn't get through it, we were using fire trucks to respond to calls. We got a hold of the fire department. We put a police officer in one of the large rescue vehicles to respond to calls. Quite honestly, that's not the best use of a fire truck, because in cold weather also, with power outage particularly, fires are a real threat. So they need those vehicles to respond to fires or medical emergencies if they were to come. So after that, being aware of this 1033 program, I approached our town manager and I said, I'd really like to get a Humvee, because of several reasons. Number one, they go through anything. Number two, they're free. Close to a $50,000 vehicle that we got for nothing. The only thing we had to do was go to Pennsylvania and transport it back. It's not an armored vehicle. There was an option to get an armored Humvee. We chose not to get that. We don't need an armored Humvee because it's not a response vehicle. We marked it up to look similar to a police car. It looks black and white. If anybody has driven by our police station, they see it there. We also use it for not only getting through severe weather and storms, we also use it for PR, public relations. We bring it to the schools. We had it last week for any of you who live in town. They had a chili festival up at the high school. They also had what they call a touch and truck event. Our public works department brought some of the big trucks. Our fire department brought some of the vehicles. We brought the Humvee. The kids love going through it, and it's an opportunity for the officers to kind of engage with the younger kids because they love it. I have a great picture that was on the cover of one of our annual reports last year. There was still little type cars that marked up like a police car, black and white. I got that picture of that in front of our Humvee with little kids sitting in that. I was sitting in the Humvee. It's a great picture. But so that's the reason we have it. We have it for response through bad weather, the thing can really literally go over trees because, as you know, when we have severe storms here, it closes roads for sometimes a long time. So we use it for a response. We don't have any tactical equipment in it. We have no weapons in it. It's basically just a transport vehicle to get officers where they need to go in the event of severe storms, significant snowfall, and so forth.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not the Humvees that we take issue with. It's more like the chief talked about the MRAPs and these Bearcats, which are armored vehicles. They're very imposing. Many departments paint them in schemes that do look, or leave them the way they're painted, which look very militaristic. And what our concern is that, like the chief said, this 1033 program has been around for over 30 years. There's been an increase in the amount of surplus that's been given to law enforcement, and that's really been fueled by the war on drugs and generally, counterterrorism measures. Again, like I said, the main thing is that the public know about it. It seems like the town of Coventry is really engaging, the town manager as well as the town council. That is absolutely not happening in most communities, so that's something that we are concerned about.
If I could just add a follow-up comment to that. I agree with David. If a police chief was to feel that their agency needed an armored vehicle like an MRAP, without question, in my opinion, they should engage their elected officials, their mayor, the town manager, first selectman, or whoever is the chief elected official of that community. I just think that's the right thing to do. And one of the reasons why there's so much more equipment coming out of the 1033 program, and it's so much more available, is because of the military disengagement from the Middle East. There is just so much equipment out there that I get emails every day from some sources that I have that check those lists regularly. In fact, Congressman Joe Courtney, approximately, I want to say a year to 18 months ago, he held a forum over at Eastern Connecticut University regarding this program of surplus military equipment, and there are even some thoughts that it might start going to veteran-owned businesses and things like that, because there's just so much equipment being stockpiled other than military-type assault vehicles, and I understand that's what the concern is, and I know there are some communities that have got that. I think you really need to understand the implications of getting a vehicle like that, because it's free, but there's still, there's a perception issue with the public.
Maintenance free.
It's not right. That was my next comment. It's not maintenance free. Those vehicles, even our Humvee, is so over-engineered that it's not just a matter of lifting up the hood and changing the spark plug, because those the assault type vehicles or the mine resistant vehicles are designed to be so hardened that it's not easy to maintain them and those types of things, and even specialized mechanics would be necessary to do that, not just an ordinary diesel mechanic. But I think it's important, like Dave said, if a department feels that they need that type of vehicle because of the types of calls they respond to, if they have their own SWAT team or emergency services team, they call them different things. It's important to kind of engage not only the elected officials, but I think the community on those topics.
Okay, you mentioned that the Humvee did not have weapons, but since 2010, according to the Hartford Current, our police department has received 17 high-powered M14 and M16 military rifles from the same program. And how are those being used, and what plans do you have for them in the future?
We have 15. I think that might have been a typo or a little inaccurate. We have 15 M16 rifles. They're not fully automatic. They came fully automatic, but they were modified to be single-shot weapons. It's not a machine gun. Quite frankly, they're from the Vietnam era. That's because the wrapping that we got from, I think, was from quite some time. But the weapons were they were modified to be what we in law enforcement call a patrol rifle. Prior to us getting those, we carried shotguns in our vehicles, and there's a lot of data and information and research that suggests that a patrol rifle is a better weapon for officers to respond with as opposed to a shotgun. And I'll tell you why I decided, and again, I just want to clarify that when I decided that we would like to have these weapons, I did engage with our...
Why is it a better weapon than a shotgun?
It's more accurate.
Okay.
It's, a shotgun, for those of you who may have owned shotguns or been hunters, a shotgun, when it shoots, it scatters a number of pellets. So it's not as accurate as a patrol rifle. It's easier to handle than a patrol rifle, particularly for our officers that are smaller in stature. We have a few female officers. It's a lot easier to fire than a 12-gauge shotgun. But we've had some incidents in town. Believe it or not, the quiet town of Coventry has had a number of incidents in town where a patrol rifle would have been a lot more useful than just an officer's sidearm. We had a few times when somebody armed with a weapon was engaging with the officer. There were shots exchanged. Nobody got killed or injured, but a patrol rifle is a much more effective weapon than a handgun. A handgun, for those of you who either own or know about firearms, is not a real accurate weapon, particularly when an officer is under stress and under a difficult situation. Patrol rifle is a lot more accurate. We carry it in the trunks of the vehicles. Everybody's highly trained with the patrol rifles. And regardless if we got those weapons through the military program or not, it was my plan to get them for our police officers. But to get them free is a lot better than having the town taxpayers pay for them. The weapons, the way we have them set up, the weapons are about $1,200 each. And we would have had to, instead of being able to get them all at once, we would have had to buy a couple each year over a series of years. So this was an inexpensive way to have these weapons for our officers.
And I imagine the officers training, you get training on.
Yes, they get trained at least twice a year with weapons.
Okay, rather than ask you to comment on this, David, I'm going to ask you the next question, and you can wrap your comment into that. The ACLU has raised the alarm about police departments getting military equipment. Why shouldn't the police be equipped for the worst possible emergencies?
Well, we certainly don't want to handicap the police or put them in danger or prevent them from keeping public safe. That's certainly not the aim of it. There are some items that have been received by departments under 1033 that are truly questionable. Bayonets, for example, grenade launchers and things of that nature. I don't believe the Coventry Police Department has applied or received any of those items, but there are just some real concerns. Again, our biggest point is that there needs to be training and restraint around the use of these weapons. Like the chief has alluded to, perception is everything in the business of policing. So you want the public to feel secure that you're protecting them, not treating them as the enemy. And this all goes a long way to changing the mentality and culture of a police department. I mean, there are trainings that have been provided for law enforcement in Connecticut that really has a mindset of a survivalist mentality, more like a we versus them. Again, I don't think that that's anything the Coventry Police Department is doing, but it's things that worry us very much. And the other thing to mention really quickly is it's not just the 1033 program. Law enforcement agencies in Connecticut get more of this type of equipment through what they call JAG grants. These are federal justice grants that are given out to help fight, terrorism, the drug war, things of that nature. A lot of departments are similarly applying for JAG funding and then using it for this kind of equipment. There's very little oversight of the JAG program. That's come under scrutiny since Ferguson. And the other important thing to note is that the JAG program can be used for a lot of things. Rehabilitation facilities, body-worn cameras, things that do promote, that trust and engagement between police and the public. So that's another issue that people have looked into.
Can I just make a follow-up comment on that? Let me be clear that although it doesn't happen here in Coventry on a regular basis, there are instances here in Coventry, and I would suggest any of the 169 towns in the state of Connecticut, where it's important to have the appropriate equipment to protect the officers that are responding to sometimes very difficult circumstances. I can't tell you how many gun permits I signed in the course of the week. And as fine that everybody, goes through, most people go through the process to get a gun permit, purchase a weapon. We also, at the police department, it's a requirement of the law that when somebody purchases a weapon, the registration form that we get, and there's a lot of weapons in town, which is fine. They're within the law. But there are times, whether it be a domestic disturbance, deranged individual, an intoxicated individual, somebody under the influence of illegal narcotics, where there are threats made against other people, against law enforcement, and it's important to have the proper equipment that they have to protect themselves when they have to respond to these types of incidents, because they're the ones that are getting the calls. Now, the way that equipment is obtained and the way it's used, again, I agree that it's very important to let the public or the citizens in that community understand the type of equipment they have and how it's going to be used. Also with the JAG grants, the Justice Assistance Grants, my belief and my understanding is that the Justice Assistance Grants, once the application is prepared, it's got to go to a committee, usually of the elected body, to kind of approve that grant to move forward. I could be wrong in my recollection. When we apply for Justice Assistance Grants, which we don't use for military equipment, it has to go to our elected officials to approve that grant to be passed forward to the OPM, which is the Office of Policy and Management in the state of Connecticut, that ultimately approves the grant. So I believe there is some type of process that's required before we submit that grant to OPM.
OPM is the gateway. I do know that some departments have applied directly through OPM, but that is right.
Okay. Now, the chief and other police have described many beneficial uses for the military equipment they've acquired, not just fighting crime, for example, using them to rescue people during natural disasters, and you're talking about storms and so forth. Dave, do you think that these issues then override concerns about potential misuse?
I think it's all a balance between these forces. They need the tools, certainly, but you don't have to be, necessarily over-prepared to the nth degree. So it's important to know that the National Guard in Connecticut, who does often respond to, large disasters, has absolutely no MRAPs. Whereas since 2005, 11 departments in Connecticut have received MRAPs. So there's kind of this misbalance. Again, I think the chief spoke to it, that police need the tools to respond to, say, an active shooter situation or a hostage situation, certainly. Especially in more rural parts of the state, there are a lot of regional forces, where multiple departments will train a couple of officers in each department to respond to this kind of situation. So what we're seeing are some very small departments that are acquiring a lot of military equipment, and that, we think, the balance is not quite there. Again, not at all pointing to Coventry and the fact that there is this oversight, and for example, the modification of the M16s does seem like a very appropriate use of that kind of a weapon, but most departments haven't engaged in this kind of discussion.
Okay. You want to say anything about that?
Yes. In regards to the National Guard, there's a process in which the National Guard has to be activated. Only the governor can activate the National Guard. If there's a real problem in here in the town of Coventry, the town manager can contact the governor who can activate the National Guard. But the National Guard responds to natural disasters, severe weather emergencies. If we were to experience a tornado that took out half the town, they would probably help with the recovery. The National Guard doesn't respond to domestic disturbances. They don't respond to reports of a person with a gun. They don't respond to serious assaults and those types, or burglary in progress. So I just want to be clear that the National Guard, while they're a great resource to have, they're not an immediate response force. They're usually a recovery force. In larger communities, if there was a major protest or civil uprising, the National Guard can be activated by the government to assist local law enforcement with that. But when police departments have to respond to these calls, and I've been there myself, sometimes they're, for lack of a better word, pretty scary when officers have to respond to a situation where somebody's shooting at them. It's happened as close as Manchester. Not too long ago, a police officer was shot in Manchester, and responding to what was kind of a routine call, and he was shot when somebody opened up the door and shot him in the shoulder. Luckily, he recovered. But the Manchester police had equipment to respond to that incident and resolve it in a peaceful way, as best they could. But that's the society that we're faced with today. Sometimes police officers have to respond to really, really difficult situations, but sometimes those are personal.
Right, but in some cases, in response to your question, departments have justified, a personnel carrier as a justification that they need to get people that are in a lot of snow. So that we're saying that's the mismatch in our mind. But there are, of course, some real, emergencies need to be dealt with quickly, and the police should have the tools for that, certainly.
Okay. After the aggressive police response to protests in Ferguson, Missouri, many people were surprised to find out from news reports that their local police departments had also acquired military weapons and vehicles. Should there be a public hearing or even a public vote before police get this equipment? Is that the contention of these LWVNECT?
Yeah, we think that there should be a public hearing, that there should be, some kind of authorization from the body, as well as some kind of a reporting function. So, for example, if XYZ town acquired a tank, that they report to their citizens on an annual basis, say how many times they use that vehicle, and generally for what, not specifics of the victims or the crime, but just that they use it this many times. And I think that also goes hand in hand with the SWAT issue, that we've seen an extreme explosion in the numbers of SWAT deployments in the state of Connecticut and across the country, many of which are what they call, proactive, choice-driven SWAT raids. So it's not they're responding to an active shooter, that they're going to serve a warrant. In some cases, there's been documentation to show that they didn't have any reason to believe there would be, an armed person, for example. So we believe that when SWAT is used, particularly during no-knock raids, where they just break the door down, that there should be some reporting around that. And a couple of states have enacted statewide legislation mandating that. And what we found is that it certainly promotes confidence in the police that they're using these tools appropriately, and it also encourages restraint.
Quite honestly, I don't know if a public hearing is that practical or that feasible to do. I think what I would propose and what happens here in the town, at least the elected body should be notified of what type of equipment.
So the town council, for instance.
Well, the town council or whatever the elected body is. Some towns have select people, select persons. And it should be up to them whether they feel that a public hearing should be necessary. And I can relate a story kind of similar to that. When I first became the police chief here, I was surprised that police officers were going out with one police officer, usually on the overnight shift, which to me just didn't make sense. So I quickly was able to change that. So we always have at least 2 police officers on duty in the overnight shift. But one of the things that I proposed, and I had done all my research and contacted the folks that needed to be contacted, was to have tasers for our police officers. We're gathering all the information and looking at the data and looking at the reports. I'm sure David will talk about tasers later on. But I approached the town council and I explained my plan. I gave them a proposal, costs that were involved, how the officers were going to deploy the taser. We had a written policy that was developed on how the taser was to be used, and the steps that would happen if the taser deployment was done. And basically, I was told by the town council, "Well, you're a police chief. You can make the decisions what you think is best for our department." Well, I was kind of surprised at that, to be honest with you, but at least I brought it to the members of the town council. I would suggest that if I was to bring the fact that whether I was in Coventry or any other town or city, I was to bring the fact that I was going to purchase an MRAP for our town, they might want some type of public input other than the members of the town council. So I think that decision should be up to the town council instead of some type of legislation that we would have to have a public hearing for that. I think, our elected officials are the people that are voted in to make those decisions, and that's what I would suggest.
Okay. Since the subject of SWAT teams came up in the last question, we have a question here about that. Military weapons are often deployed by SWAT teams and raids. In order to increase accountability, the states of Utah and Maryland passed laws requiring police to make detailed reports of each forcible entry they carry out. Should we have such a law here in Connecticut?
Well, I'm not really sure the answer to that. I mean, we don't often make forcible entries, but I know that when forcible entries are made, there's certain court requirements that are necessary. Dave mentioned earlier, no knock warrant. The judge has to approve the fact that a police officer wants to enter a premises or building without knocking and announcing that it's the police department there with a search warrant, that the judge has to approve that. And certain facts have to be articulated to the judge in that case and in that warrant as to why they can, what they call, dispense with the requirements. And the requirements are that a police officer knock and say it's the police with a search warrant. Please open up the door. If they're going to go in the door forcibly without announcement, there has to be a reason that they have to do that. So to some degree, it's already reported. The judges know that when they sign the dispense with requirements warrant. And I think that data is probably available, whether it's reported to some legislative or state body or not. It's already available.
Is this something the CCLU is advocating?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's in one central repository, but the chief is right. I mean, departments are supposed to apply for those no-knock warrants, and it's a higher standard. The problem that we've seen, specifically in the southwestern part of the state, are a lot of entries where they say it's an exigent circumstance. So again, it's an emergency circumstance where they have some justification, and we've gotten several complaints at the ACLU of people that were, wrongfully had their door busted down and a distraction device thrown in, whether it be some kind of a sound device or a light device. Then they were handcuffed, and come to find out 45 minutes later it was the wrong apartment and they had left. So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to safeguard against. Again, we don't think that this is an overly burdensome requirement, and as the chief said, transparency goes a very, very long way to maintain public confidence.
Okay.
Especially if it's used judiciously and there's not many of these incidents, it's not a huge burden.
I don't suspect that in the law enforcement community in Connecticut anyway, I don't suspect there'd be a lot of opposition to that, because again, we are already going through a process to have a judge approve that, and to report that after the fact, I don't suspect there'd be a lot of resistance to that.
Okay. Someone mentioned tasers, and we have a question here for that. Over the past 10 years, the use of taser stun guns by police has increased dramatically. Chief, can you describe how your department uses tasers?
Well, first off, each officer has a taser that's assigned to him or her. They are trained every year, retrained every year. They initially were training for, I think, 8 hours. That was the initial training on the use of the taser and the deployment and the effects of the taser, and what to do afterwards in caring for somebody if they were in fact affected by the taser or the taser was deployed on them, and they get retrained every year. They have to manipulate the weapon and practice cartridges, and in that retraining there's always new information that comes out about taser usage, studies that have been published or promulgated or issued based on previous usage. So things do change from time to time. Where tasers can be deployed, where you should aim the tasers if you're going to shoot the darts. There's 2 ways a taser can be used if you don't know that. In fact, we had a demo for our senior citizens down here. We had a senior citizen police academy, and we brought the taser down to demonstrate how it's used and how we deploy it. Strong policies are important. Each department that has tasers must have a strong policy on when they can be deployed, how they should be deployed, what limitations there are. We saw a horrific incident in New York City not too long ago where somebody was tased on the roof of a building, and they were tased, and the person fell off the roof and died. We've heard stories of people that have been tased in water and things like that. You just can't do that. So you have to have policies in place. The officers have to be educated on those policies, retrained periodically so those policies are refreshed. And that's the story with our deployment on tasers. We also Every time we deploy a taser, which is not that often, we probably deploy a taser maybe twice a year. We have to report it. There has to be a separate use of force report as to what happened and what led up to that deployment of the taser, what the care afterwards was of the person, how they were affected, and everybody that's a taser has been deployed against has to be monitored. If they're still in custody, we have to monitor and make sure that they're not suffering any negative reactions from the taser and so forth. Particularly people, we have policies in place. We don't taser children. We don't use a taser against people that are women that are obviously pregnant, the elderly, those types of things. So it's important to have a clear policy in place. The IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, has issued what they say is a model policy that you can model your policy after locally and then modify it to what works in your community.
David, I'm going to ask you to forward your response to this question. Police say that tasers save lives because they're less lethal than firearms and protect police officers from injury by preventing physical use of force. Why does the Civil Liberties Union object to this?
Well, we don't object to the use of tasers. We've not called for a moratorium. We worked tirelessly for, I think, 4 sessions to get taser safety legislation through, which did pass last session. I'm sorry that I agree too much with the chief, but he's right. Policies are what it's all about, having policies that dictate how the tasers are to be used and having strong reporting requirements internally, as well as review of the use of force. What we found is, again, through Freedom of Information requests, found that many departments that were using tasers did not have a specific taser policy. They have a use of force policy, but would not mention the taser specifically. The law that passed this past session that goes into effect in January, really starts going into effect, requires every department to have a policy and will provide from post the Police Officer Standards and Training Council a baseline policy, and departments can implement a more stringent policy, which it sounds like the Coventry policy will be more protective. Then it will also require state reporting on the number of times someone's tased, their gender, their race, and this will give people in Connecticut, legislators and the public, a better idea of how tasers are being used. And since 2005, there have been 15 people that have died in Connecticut since being tased. So there is some real concern, but like the chief said, used appropriately and with proper restraint, it can be something that can be a good tool. And 2 years sounds like proper restraint.
Okay, I still have some more questions here, but this time I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. If there aren't enough questions from the audience, then I'll go back to the ones left. Bob?
I have a number of questions for the chief, and you can interrupt me if I have too many questions. If I heard correctly, there was a mix of M16s and M14s?
No. We do have 2 M14s.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I corrected you earlier. There were 17. And after that, we have 2 M14s that are used for ceremonial purposes for honor guard.
Okay.
They're not used, they're not deployed into the field.
Are the M16 scoped?
No.
Okay. So they're standard issue?
They're fixed iron sights.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, we are trying to, we're trying to get what they call reflex sights. You're familiar with the reflex sight. We're trying to get reflex sights through the 1033 program, which is a better and more accurate sight than the iron sights.
No, so does the department have, so if you're not scoped, I presume the department does not have any trained snipers?
We do not.
Okay.
I'll kind of follow up on that question so people know. We don't have our own SWAT team. We're not big enough. We have 15 officers. And at any given time, there might be 2 up to 4 or 5 officers working. So we don't have enough officers to deploy as a SWAT team, a typical emergency services unit. We are a member of the CREST team, C-R-E-S-T. It's called the Capital Region Emergency Response Team. We're a member community along with 12 or 13 other communities usually east of the Capital Region, which includes Manchester, Glastonbury, Vernon, Enfield, and a number of other communities. So if there is an incident in town, we have had the CREST team here in town with barricade armed subjects. They respond. They train regularly. We have 2 members of the CREST team. that are not what we call tactical officers, they're negotiators. So if there's an incident where they have to respond and negotiate with somebody who might be armed and maybe have a hostage, we are part of that.
Do you still carry the shotguns in the cruiser? Okay, so the shotguns are gone.
Shotguns are gone.
All right, my last question, and most important question, is this issue of the no-knock. I'm sure you're aware that there have been quite a number of instances in this country in the last 15 to 18 months where the no-knock has been used. And of course, the individual in the house has no idea who it is that's breaking into his home or her home. And if that person is armed, trying to defend their home, and it's the police that are breaking in, that person will be shot.
Well, or perhaps the police will be shot.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about an individual. Let's just use the example that you used, which was wrong house. The person inside the house has no idea who it is that's trying to break into the house. They're trying to protect their family. If they have a weapon on them, okay, the police are authorized to shoot, to kill.
Not necessarily. Just the fact that they might have a weapon on.
No, I mean a weapon that's aimed at, let's just say it's aimed at a door that the police are coming through.
Yes.
That would be enough for the police to shoot.
In all likelihood.
Okay. But what are the criteria for one of these no-knock warrants?
Well, generally the criteria for no-knock warrant is that the person is armed and may assault the officers when they go there and knock on the door and say police with a warrant.
Now, how do they know that?
Because you knock on the door and say police with a warrant.
No, they can that says,
I'm saying, yes, what do you tell a judge to give you the right to break into someone's house, okay, and shoot the person in the house if they're trying to defend themselves?
Yeah.
I guess is
Well,
what
what you're telling the judge is the reasons why he should grant a no-knock warrant. And, you know, and I don't know, Dave might have the numbers because I don't. It's not as common a practice as some people might think.
Well, I mean, it's probably not as common in this part of the country as it may be in other parts.
Yeah, I don't think it's all that common, but what I said is that many times it's under the exigent circumstance requirement. They're not necessarily getting that no-knock warrant. They're saying this is an emergency. We're looking for a suspect.
That's what I was saying. So you're saying they can actually do it proactively without going to the judge.
It's very narrow exception. It's a very narrow exception, but you know we don't have a handle on understanding how often.
You don't put the homeowner. Well, I'm talking about the innocent homeowner now. Well, if it's a red house, or if typically that's the kind of thing that you're trying to do.
I don't know if you're familiar. I don't know if the chief is, but a few years back in Easton, Connecticut, the regional SWAT team busted into a house. They thought it was a drug haven, and killed an unarmed person. And, they recently started $4.5 million. Yeah. So that is a kind of extreme example of how it can go wrong. Not to say there are certainly instances where it is justified to get that no-knock warrant. What we just want to have is a better handle on how often it happens, and a better understanding. Because we're getting a limited number of people reaching out to us, and we're not hearing about many instances. So
the ones that I'm aware of have all occurred in the Southwest and on the West Coast. And in a number of situations, the person that was killed was a former military individual who, happened to have a weapon and was trying to protect their family. And of course, the policeman, they're flying blind, basically. The default is if you've got a weapon, you're going to get shot.
My experience with those no-knock type warrants is somewhat limited. However, in my previous position, there were some instances where the police department did receive no-knock warrants. But you have to have good information, you have to have good intelligence. The standard is very high to get the warrant, but nobody wants to. The police officers don't want to face an armed person when they go to court, and they don't want to shoot anybody. You have to have information where people may be located in the house, if there's any children in the house. The police, it's common practice for the police to work with informants. It's common practice in larger agencies anyway for police to be undercover. It's common practice to do surveillance before you do a no-knock warrant. Understand who's home, who's not home, where people in the house may be. So it's a very high threshold to get the warrant. And
What's an example of the exigence?
Destruction of vital evidence in criminal investigation.
Okay. So there you act immediately and go to the judge afterwards.
No, we structure the warrant. We don't. If an exigent circumstance, entry into a home, again, it's even a higher standard than no-knock warrant. If there is a crime being committed, a serious felony crime being committed at the time, where somebody's life is in danger, the police can enter without a search warrant. But,
For example, if someone called on the telephones and said, you know, my husband is trying to kill me,
that is a circumstance.
and the door is locked, obviously you're going to knock the door down
Well,
and enter the house.
we're gonna get into the house, whether we knock the door down or get in some other way.
Okay.
We're gonna go into the house and try to protect that house.
The idea is it's such an emergency or like as it's state, you don't have time to go to court.
My last comment is I'd like to commend you on having repainted the Humvee. It seems like a very small thing, but taking a camo vehicle and putting police markings on it makes a huge difference.
Thank you.
We agree with that.
Are there other questions?
You have mentioned that there are two ways you use tasers, and then you
All right.
some of they work.
Sure. The taser, the first way it can be deployed is it actually shoots darts. They look like small fish hooks. They're about an inch long, with a small little bar line. There's two wires that go out, and when it makes contact with an individual, it sends an low voltage electrical shock through the muscles and interrupts the muscles of that individual, and basically just stiffen up. The other way is what they call a drive stun, D-R-I-V-E stun. So you take the cartridge off, and if anybody remembers the old type stun guns they used to have that had two little electrodes with a spark that went in between them, that's the way in which the other way in which it can be used. One way is disrupting muscle motion, and that's with the darts. The other way is pain compliance, and basically it hurts. And if somebody is trying to take somebody into custody, you can use that using the large muscle areas like the legs, arms, and those areas. And that's how the taser is deployed.
I didn't understand the one about the electrode.
It's two little electrodes.
Yeah, but what is it that's actually being zapped to the person? An electrical pulse?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And how come people's hearts don't stop beating?
Because it's a very low voltage shock.
So the law that passed this last legislative session will require reporting on the mode that the person was tasered in as well, which we think is significant. The chief did a great job of explaining the two different modes. There are some departments that have banned the use of drive stun mode because they've said it doesn't serve the purpose. The incapacitation is to get the person down and get them handcuffed if they're, a threat in some way, an active threat. Whereas the drive stun mode is really, like the chief said, pain compliance. Some departments have said that in very close quarters, that's what they have to do, and others have said that that's, tantamount to hitting someone with a club. So that's remains to be seen, but our data will show us how often each of those are used pretty soon.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's not low voltage, it's low amperage. It's very low amperage charge.
Okay, yes.
I am pleased to see that in Coventry we seem to have a very well-informed and enlightened Chief of Police. What I wanted to ask David is, given the differences obviously between urban, rural, etc., how typical is our chief in the state of Connecticut being well-informed and being enlightened about issues that civil liberties is concerned about?
That's a great question. If any chief has agreed to this forum, I think they're at least open-minded, which is really all we ask for. I would say, I don't know if the chief wants me to say this on video, but he seems like one of the more progressive chiefs in terms of wanting to have good policies and documentation and safeguards. I can't say that that's the majority in Connecticut. At the legislature, it's a very frustrating process for the ACLU because, again, I think most chiefs and officers that know us and have talked with me know that I'm not trying to make things difficult or dangerous for them, but it's difficult to get that dialogue and sit at the table and say, look, you know, you want X, we want Y. Where's the right area in between? Because it likely is in between. The legislature is a difficult place for us, especially in these police accountability issues, because the police have a tremendous amount of accountability and lobbying power. So, you know, it's important to have these discussions, and now I'm expecting the chief to come testify to the legislature on all this good stuff. But it's a great question.
But Dave, of course, in Eastern Connecticut, most of the towns don't even have police departments. They rely on the state troopers.
Right. Well, the state police have some really good policies on many issues, and part of that is because they have the resources to really think through things and have a department. They've got lawyers that work for them. We don't have everything the state police do, but on some of the issues, they are leaders. And you're right, they have the largest police force in the state.
If I could just add a little bit to Dave's comments, I don't think law enforcement position on many issues and ACLU's position on many issues are that far apart. We're accredited police department, nationally accredited police department. There's a commission on accreditation for law enforcement agencies that accredits police departments to the voluntary programs that police departments that want to be inspected basically go through. And it's a process where they have to meet certain standards. There's standards professional standards that are vetted through a commission, which includes people from the law enforcement community. There's some Supreme Court justices on the commission. There's community leaders on the commission. There's educators on the commission. And these are basically best practices that the commission has vetted and say, if you want to meet our accreditation standards, you have to do these things and have policies that cover these standards. There's 484 standards that we, as a police department, cover. Now, we're one of only 13 municipalities in the state of Connecticut. There's, I think, 102 police departments in the state that are nationally accredited. We're the smallest police department in the state that's nationally accredited. So we're proud of that. And what that means is that we have these policies in place that regulates the officers' use of force, that regulates tasers, that regulates when they can use their handgun, that regulates our hiring practices and how we go through the hiring process and the types of people that we hire. So we're very proud of it, and we work hard because every 3 years, 2 assessors from other states come in and they go through all of our standards and ensure that we comply with these standards. Every year I can't tell how many reports I do at the end of every year in January or February that I distribute to the public and the town council. I make it available on our website through our annual report. I do reports on how many pursuits we've had. I do reports on how many instances we've had where officers had to use force during the course of their employment. I do reports on racial profiling, which is a big issue. And let me just comment on that too. The current, I think probably 2 or 3 years ago, when they were doing an investigative report on how many departments reported that racial profiling data, we were one of the 30 departments that consistently reported that profiling data. So this is my pitch for police accreditation. I think the agency is not working towards either the state accreditation or, more importantly, the CALIA, the national accreditation. I think it's behind the curve. And I encourage all my colleagues, all the police chiefs that I contact and have discussions with on a regular basis to pursue accreditation, because I think it also gives the members of the public confidence in their police department that they're meeting these nationally accepted standards.
Blanche?
I'd like to ask David, you say you request police chiefs, to have these meetings. Have you ever had anybody turn you down?
Well, I've had people just not answer my phone call. Yeah, so that's more like a comment response.
Thank you.
One more question I should have asked before. What size magazines do you have in M16? We have 2 different types of magazines. We have in the rifle is a 20-round magazine. We have in the trunks of every patrol car, we have what we call a rapid response bag. In the unlikely event there's a terrible incident similar to what we saw in San Diego or a lot of other schools around the country, and officers had to respond, we keep 30-round magazines in their plus. And what size magazines do you have in your handguns?
Depends on the type of handgun. I carry a smaller handgun than the other officers. Russ, how many?
You probably have at least 15, right?
No.
Depending on the size, it's either 14 or 13.
Okay, 15 or 13.
You probably know where I'm going with this. Why do you need more than 10 rounds? Which is what the state is, requires of its non-enforcement people.
Well, the state legislature enacted that law, and
But I'm interested in your opinion. Why does the police feel they need more than 10 rounds?
well, quite frankly, because it's more likely that a police officer is going to get in a gun battle with somebody than a private citizen that might be in their home, protecting their home or their family. Because police officers actively respond to incidents where people are armed and basically don't have the option to run away.
Of course, but I mean, the larger question is, why do you need so many rounds in a magazine?
Well, I think
People would ask that question. Legislators ask that question. Why does somebody need 10, 15 rounds in a magazine?
Well, as I said before, a handgun is not really the most accurate weapon.
I understand.
Even though we train with it regularly, it's not necessarily the most accurate weapon. And there's a number of examples of people police officers that have been outgunned by other people. There's a horrendous video of a bank robbery in LA, which I think every police officer that went through their academy training has seen, that basically the officers were well outgunned by people with machine guns that were very adept at using those weapons. They had a very specific plan on how they were going to use them. They were armed with body armor. Okay, it's horrendous to watch that.
Incidentally, I completely agree with your policy.
Okay.
And the size of your magazines.
Okay.
I'm really just trying to make the point that many people that talk about magazine size and why do we need so many bullets in the magazine have no idea what an engagement is like. Mm-hmm. And I know under stress that I don't care how much you train. It's a different animal.
On behalf of the Connecticut Civil Liberties Union and the Northeastern Connecticut chapter of the Legal Women Voters, I want to thank those folks in our audience for coming out tonight. As a resident of Coventry, I must say that I feel very pleased and proud that we have such a wonderful Chief of Police. And I also want to say that as a member of the Civil Liberties Union, I'm delighted that David is there to make sure that when you don't have as enlightened a police chief, someone is there to make sure that things are taken care of properly.
I want to thank everybody for coming too, and thank you for your questions, very interesting questions, and thank you for your comments. But I just want to let everybody know I'm just the guy that stands out front and waves the flag for my department, because we've got a lot of good officers. They work hard every day. They do some very good things, and I'm proud of what they do. So I just tell them I stand out front and wave the flag.
Okay, do that, so we'll call the meeting adjourned.
I will.